He gave her everything, a home, his loyalty, his love. But one night, he overheard his wife whispering to her secret lover, wishing her husband would just disappear forever. And that's exactly what he did. But not in the way she expected. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment where you watching from. There are some stories that begin with love so deep and so real, you'd think nothing in this world could ever break it. And yet, sometimes the very people we trust with our lives are the ones who take us apart piece by piece. This is the story of Michael and Sarah Thompson, an ordinary couple living in a small town in Ohio. It is a story of devotion, betrayal, heartbreak, and a choice that changed everything. Michael Thompson wasn't the kind of man who stood out in a crowd. He didn't own fancy clothes or drive an expensive car. He wasn't the type you'd call charming at first glance. He was simple, hardworking, the kind of man who believed that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up every single day. For years, Michael worked construction, spending long hours beneath the Ohio sun, carrying beams, mixing concrete, hauling tools until his back ached and his hands were rough and scarred. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and every paycheck he brought home, he laid it proudly on the kitchen counter, knowing it meant food on the table and a roof over their heads. Sarah, his wife of 5 years, had been the kind of woman who once looked at Michael like he hung the moon. When they first met, she used to brag about how dependable he was, how different he was from the smooth-talking men who never kept their promises. Michael might not have been rich or flashy, but he was loyal, and for Sarah in the beginning that loyalty meant the world. Their life together wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They lived in a modest 2-story house at the edge of town, with a little front porch where Sarah liked to sit with her coffee in the mornings, and a backyard where Michael had once dreamed of building a swing set for the children they planned to have. They didn't have much, but Michael thought they had enough. Every morning before work, Michael would kiss Sarah on the forehead, whispering a promise to work hard for her, for them, for their future. And every night, no matter how tired he was, he came home to her, carrying groceries, fixing broken hinges, mowing the lawn, and doing his best to keep her smiling. To him, marriage was a lifelong vow, not just words spoken at an altar. But as the years passed, little cracks began to show. Sarah started complaining about the life they lived. The modest house, the old car that Michael drove to the construction site, the vacations they couldn't afford. She spent hours scrolling through social media, pointing out the pictures of women she knew traveling to the coast, shopping at high-end stores, dining at expensive restaurants. "Don't you ever get tired of just scraping by?" she would sometimes ask him. Michael would sigh, place his calloused hands over hers and say, "Sarah, I know it's not much, but it's ours. And I'm working every day to make it better." She'd smile faintly, but the light in her eyes wasn't the same as before. Michael noticed the distance growing between them, but he told himself it was just a phase. Every couple went through struggles. Every marriage had its seasons. He just needed to work harder, love her more, and things would turn around. That's what he believed. One of the things Michael was most proud of was the silver sedan he had surprised Sarah with 2 years into their marriage. He had saved every extra dollar, skipped buying new boots when his old ones wore thin, took extra shifts at the construction site just so he could afford it. He remembered the way her face lit up when he handed her the keys, wrapped in a little red ribbon. "You did this for me?" she had asked, eyes wide. "For us," Michael had answered, smiling as he watched her jump into his arms, laughing like a child. That night, Michael had gone to bed believing he had given her proof that his love was real. But what he didn't realize was that Sarah's heart was slowly drifting elsewhere. It started with little things, her laughter at text messages she never showed him, the phone calls she took in another room, the sudden perfume he didn't recognize when she walked past him. Michael noticed, of course he did, but he trusted her. He trusted that the woman he'd given everything to wouldn't betray him. Michael's best friend, Daniel, once hinted that Sarah seemed different, distant, maybe even distracted by someone else. Michael had shaken his head and replied, "No, not Sarah. She's just stressed. She's tired of the bills and the long days. She still loves me. I know she does. But deep down, a quiet fear had started to grow in him. On most evenings, Michael would come home to find Sarah curled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when he walked through the door. She had excuses for why she didn't want to go out with him anymore. Too tired, too busy, not in the mood. The warmth that once filled their home had dimmed, replaced by something colder, something Michael couldn't quite name. And then came that night. The night that changed everything. Michael came home earlier than usual, his boots heavy with dust from the construction site. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the porch light flickered softly against the dark. He placed his hand on the doorknob, ready to walk in when he heard her voice. Through the thin crack of the door, Sarah's words drifted out, sharp and cutting. "Honestly, his presence irritates me. I wish he would just disappear forever so I can finally be with you." Michael froze. At first, he thought he must have misheard, but then came the sound of her laughter. Light, playful, cruel in a way he had never heard before. On the other end of the phone was a man's voice. Faint but distinct. Sarah giggled again, her tone sweet, the kind of sweetness she hadn't shown Michael in years. Michael's chest tightened. His breath caught in his throat. Every word she spoke sliced into him like a blade. "He doesn't even realize how small he is compared to you," Sarah whispered into the phone. "He has no idea what it's like to be with a real man. I can't wait until I can finally leave him behind." Michael leaned against the doorframe, the grit of the day still clinging to his skin, but now it felt heavier, unbearable. His calloused hands trembled. The woman he had sacrificed everything for was mocking him, belittling him, dreaming of a life without him, right inside the home he had built for her. He stood there until the call ended, until silence filled the living room again. And only then did he turn the knob. When he stepped inside, Sarah was on the couch, her phone face down beside her, a faint smile still tugging at her lips. She looked up quickly and forced a calm expression. "You're home early," she said casually, as though nothing had happened. Michael nodded. His voice steady even though his heart was breaking. "Job wrapped sooner than expected." He set his lunch pail on the counter, hung his jacket on the hook, and moved through the room with deliberate calm. Every movement was slow, controlled, like a mask to hide the storm raging inside him. Sarah reached for her wine glass, sipping with ease, not a hint of guilt in her eyes. Michael sat in his chair, his rough hands resting on his knees, staring at her as if memorizing the face of a stranger. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, each sound hammering into his chest. He didn't confront her. He didn't ask her who she was talking to. He didn't cry or shout. He just sat there, silent, letting the bitterness sink deep into his bones. Inside something shifted. The man Sarah mocked as small was no longer wounded. He was calculating. She wanted him gone. She wanted him out of her life. And soon, she would learn what it truly meant to live without him. That was the night Michael Thompson's love began to die, and his resolve was born. Life has a way of testing how much a heart can hold before it finally breaks. For Michael Thompson, that breaking point came quietly, not with a scream or a slammed door, but with the silence of a man who decided to stop waiting for love that was never coming back. The morning after overhearing Sarah's words, Michael sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the woman sleeping soundly beside him. She looked peaceful, even innocent, with her hair spread across the pillow and her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. If a stranger had walked in, they would have thought she was the picture of devotion. But Michael knew better now. As he pulled on his work boots, he thought about the man on the other end of that phone call. He didn't know his name. He didn't know his face. But he knew enough. This man had stolen Sarah's heart, and Sarah had offered it freely. Michael drove to work that morning in silence, the hum of the old truck echoing through his bones. The radio stayed off. His thoughts were louder than any song. He thought about the years he had poured into this marriage, the nights he had gone hungry so Sarah could eat more, the overtime shifts that left his body aching but their bills paid. He thought about the promises they made in that small Ohio church, standing before friends and family, vowing to love each other for better or worse. It wasn't the betrayal alone that cut so deep. It was the mockery. The way she laughed about him to another man. The way she spoke of him as if he were nothing but an obstacle in her path. Michael worked that day with a quiet determination. His hammer striking nails into beams with unusual force. His co-workers noticed something different in him. He wasn't smiling, wasn't joking like he used to. He was sharper, colder, as though something heavy sat inside him. When the sun dipped low, Michael returned home. The smell of perfume hit him first when he stepped through the door. Not the soft vanilla scent Sarah used to wear, but something stronger, something new. She was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up at him. "You're late," she muttered, as though his exhaustion were an inconvenience to her. Michael didn't answer. He placed his lunch pail on the counter, washed his hands at the sink, and sat across from her. He studied her face, the way she tilted her head when reading a message, the quick little smile that tugged at her lips. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice calm, almost too calm. "Are you happy with me?" She looked up, startled, blinking at him as though the question had caught her off guard. For a brief second, guilt flashed in her eyes, but then she shrugged. "I don't know, Michael. I don't think happiness is something I feel much these days." The words stung, though she had spoken them with little emotion. "I do everything I can for you," Michael said quietly. "I work until my hands bleed. I give you everything I've got. And still, it's not enough, is it?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're a good man, Michael. You always have been. But good doesn't pay for vacations. Good doesn't buy new dresses or make life exciting. Feel like we're stuck. Like I'm drowning in the same routine every day." He nodded slowly, absorbing each word. Inside, his heart ached, but his face stayed steady. "I see," he said softly. That night, Michael lay awake long after Sarah had drifted off to sleep. The sound of her breathing filled the room, but his mind was far away, drifting between memories and painful truths. He thought of the girl he had once fallen in love with, the woman who used to hold his hand and whisper that she couldn't imagine life without him. Where had she gone? Was she ever really there, or had he been fooling himself all along? The days turned into weeks, and the distance between them grew wider. Sarah stopped pretending altogether. She came home late, sometimes with excuses about visiting friends, sometimes with none at all. She dressed differently. Bolder, flashier. She spent hours locked in the bathroom, doing her makeup, curling her hair, only to leave the house without telling Michael where she was going. Michael never raised his voice. He never accused her. He simply watched, quietly, the way a storm builds on the horizon. One evening, Michael returned from work to find Sarah in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She was wearing a dress he had never seen before, short, tight, and clearly chosen to impress someone who wasn't him. On the counter sat 2 wine glasses, but only one was filled. "Expecting company?" he asked, his tone light but edged with something darker. Sarah's head snapped up. For a moment she looked caught, then she laughed nervously. "No, of course not. Just poured too much." Michael's eyes flicked to the second glass, then back to her. He said nothing more. Later that night, while Sarah showered, Michael checked her phone. It wasn't something he ever thought he'd do, but the truth was already out there. He just needed to see it with his own eyes. And there it was. Dozens of messages from a man named Ryan. Sweet words, late-night promises, plans for the future. "Can't wait until he's out of the picture. You deserve better than him. Soon it'll be just us." Michael's stomach turned as he read, but his face remained expressionless when Sarah emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around her. He set the phone down gently, as though nothing had happened. From that night forward, Michael changed. Not in ways Sarah could easily see, but deep inside. The man who once lived for her smile no longer sought it. The man who once sacrificed everything to make her happy no longer cared to try. Instead, Michael began to plan. He started paying attention to her routines. The times she left, the places she said she was going, the little lies she told without blinking. He studied her like a man preparing for battle, gathering every piece of information he could. On the surface, he remained calm, even affectionate at times, but beneath the quiet exterior was a storm brewing, silent but deadly. Sarah, oblivious, grew bolder. She stopped hiding her phone. She laughed louder at her messages. She even began comparing Michael to Ryan in little ways, subtle digs meant to humiliate him. "Ryan would never forget an anniversary," she muttered once when Michael came home late from work. "Ryan knows how to have fun, not just work all the time," she said another evening. Michael absorbed every insult like stone, showing no reaction. But inside, each word was another cut, another reason to do what he knew was coming. Daniel, his best friend, noticed the change in him. One afternoon, while they were working side by side on the site, Daniel said, "Mike, you're not yourself these days. You're quieter. What's going on?" Michael wiped the sweat from his brow, staring at the half-built wall in front of them. "Just life," he muttered. "You know you can tell me anything," Daniel pressed. Michael hesitated, then shook his head. "Not this, Dan. Not this." 'Cause how could he explain it? How could he put into words the slow destruction of his marriage, the way Sarah's betrayal had hollowed him out, the way he now thought not of saving their love, but of ending it in his own way? No, this wasn't something Daniel, or anyone, could understand. The final straw came one rainy Friday night. Michael returned home early again, soaked from the downpour, only to find Sarah standing on the porch with an umbrella. She wasn't alone. Ryan was there. The two of them stood close, too close. Sarah's hand brushed against Ryan's arm, her laughter ringing out into the night. When she saw Michael, her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Michael," she said quickly, This is my friend Ryan." He was just dropping something off. Michael met Ryan's gaze. The man was taller, broader, dressed neatly in a suit that made Michael's work clothes look shabby in comparison. Ryan extended a hand. "Good to meet you," he said smoothly. Michael stared at the hand, then slowly took it. His grip was firm, unyielding, his eyes locked on Ryan's. Neither man looked away. "Friend, huh?" Michael said finally, his tone calm, almost eerily so. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, just a friend." Michael smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Good to know." Ryan left soon after, but the damage was done. Sarah didn't even bother to hide it anymore. That night, Michael lay awake once more, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the rain against the roof was steady, like a drumbeat echoing his thoughts. He thought about the years wasted, the love squandered, the trust shattered. He thought about how Sarah wanted him gone, how Ryan wanted him out of the picture. And for the first time, he didn't just think about leaving. He thought about taking back control. Because if Sarah wanted life without him so badly, then maybe, just maybe, it was time to give her exactly what she wished for. Only not in the way she imagined. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers or enemies or accidents. It comes from the person you once trusted more than anyone else in the world. For Michael Thompson, that truth was like poison flowing through his veins, slow and steady, impossible to escape. After the night he saw Ryan on the porch, something inside Michael hardened. It wasn't an explosion. It was more like ice forming over a lake, layer by layer, cold and unbreakable. He still went to work. He still came home. He still mowed the lawn, paid the bills, and fixed the dripping faucet. On the outside he looked like the same man. But on the inside his love for Sarah was gone. What replaced it was something darker. Sarah noticed the change, but she mistook it for defeat. "Michael doesn't even fight anymore," she whispered once on the phone, not realizing he was standing in the hallway listening. "It's like he's given up. Soon he'll be out of the picture for good." Her words burned, but Michael didn't flinch. She wanted him gone, and he was beginning to consider how to make that happen, not by walking away, but by ensuring she would never laugh at him again. The days blurred together. Each morning he left for work, each night he came home, but every moment was filled with calculations. He studied Sarah the way a hunter studies his prey. He noticed her patterns, when she left, when she came home, when she spoke to Ryan. He began to think not just about what she was doing, but about what he could do. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending to care when she spoke. Pretending to listen when she criticized him. Pretending to be blind when she dressed up for another man. But Michael had become a master of silence. Silence was his shield. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah announced she was going shopping with friends. She dressed carefully, her perfume thick in the air. Michael watched her slip on her heels, his rough hands resting on his knees. "Be safe," he said quietly. She glanced at him with a smirk. "Don't wait up." The door clicked shut, and Michael sat in the quiet house, staring at the empty wine glass she had left behind on the table. He picked it up slowly, turning it in his hand. The glass caught the sunlight, glinting sharply. For a moment, he imagined dropping it, watching it shatter into pieces. He imagined the sound it would make, sharp and final. But instead, he set it down gently and leaned back in his chair. "Not yet," he whispered to himself. That night Michael couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch long after midnight, staring out at the quiet Ohio street. The houses around him were dark, families tucked away safely inside. But inside his own house, there was no peace. Only betrayal. Only silence. His mind wandered back to their wedding day. He remembered Sarah's smile, the way her hands trembled slightly when she slipped the ring on his finger. He remembered the way his chest swelled with pride as he whispered his vows, promising to love and protect her until the day he died. He had meant every word. Now those words felt like chains. By dawn, Michael had made a decision. He didn't say it out loud, but he carried it with him like a secret, burning quietly inside. He would not live the rest of his life as a man mocked, betrayed, and replaced. He would take control. But life has a cruel way of testing resolve. The next week, Michael came home to find Sarah on the phone again, her voice low and sweet. He stood in the kitchen just out of sight listening. "I can't wait until we're finally free," she whispered. "I wish he would just disappear already. You and me, Ryan, that's the future I want." Michael's jaw tightened. The word disappear echoed in his mind, sharp as a knife. That night, he didn't lie awake staring at the ceiling. He slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Because now he knew what he had to do. Over the following days, Michael's behavior shifted subtly. He was calmer, almost gentle, but not in the way he used to be. He spoke to Sarah with a softness that made her believe he had finally surrendered. She grew careless, more open with her calls, her absences, her disdain. One evening, she confronted him directly. "Michael," she said, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, "I think it's time we face the truth. This marriage isn't working. You and we're not the same people we used to be. I don't love you anymore." Michael looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. "Is that so?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied firmly. "I want out." For a brief moment, she expected him to explode, to argue, to beg her to stay. But Michael simply nodded. "All right," he said softly. "If that's what you want." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his calmness. She had braced herself for a fight, but there was none. Michael reached for his jacket and keys. "I'll take a drive. Give you some space." And with that he left. What Sarah didn't know was that Michael wasn't driving aimlessly. He drove to the edge of town, to a quiet diner where no one asked questions. He sat in a booth with a cup of black coffee, staring out the window as the night deepened. His mind replayed Sarah's words, every insult, every betrayal, every whisper to Ryan. By the time he left the diner, his plan was clear. The next morning, Michael acted as though nothing had happened. He kissed Sarah on the forehead before leaving for work, just as he always had. He fixed the loose step on the porch, trimmed the hedges, even brought her flowers one evening. Sarah accepted them with a smirk, tossing them carelessly into a vase, as though mocking his attempt. But Michael wasn't trying to win her back. He was building a picture. To everyone on the outside, he would still look like the devoted husband, the man who never gave up. Inside, though, he was counting down the days. The emotional turning point came late one night when Michael overheard Sarah again. Only this time the conversation was different. "I don't just want him gone," she whispered into the phone. "I want him out of my life forever. Ryan, you don't understand. His very presence makes my skin crawl. Sometimes I wish he wouldn't come back from work at all." Michael's chest burned with rage, but he didn't move. He just listened. "I'll figure something out," Sarah continued. "Maybe I'll push him to leave. Maybe I'll make his life so miserable he won't want to stay. But one way or another, he won't be around much longer. I promise you that." Michael stepped back into the shadows, his decision sealed. Sarah thought she was in control. She thought she could push him away, humiliate him, replace him. But what she didn't realize was that Michael was no longer playing the role of the heartbroken husband. He was something else now, something colder, something far more dangerous. The next morning, he greeted her with a smile. "Want me to make breakfast today?" he asked softly. Sarah blinked, suspicious. "Since when do you make breakfast?" "Since today," Michael replied, his tone gentle. She shrugged, uninterested, and returned to scrolling her phone. As the eggs sizzled in the pan, Michael's eyes hardened. This wasn't breakfast. This was the beginning of the end. The thing about quiet men like Michael Thompson is that people often mistake their silence for weakness. Sarah had made that mistake over and over. She believed his calmness meant surrender, that his silence meant he had given up. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that silence was the mask Michael wore while he waited for the right moment. After that morning when he made her breakfast, Sarah relaxed even more. She assumed his sudden gentleness was desperation, the last attempts of a man clinging to a crumbling marriage. She told herself he was harmless, pitiful even. That was her greatest mistake. Michael's plan unfolded slowly, carefully. He didn't rush. He wanted Sarah to believe she had one. In the weeks that followed, he showered her with small kindnesses. He brought her flowers. He fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. He even suggested they take a drive together one evening, just like they used to. Sarah laughed at him, dismissing the idea, but his calm smile never faltered. Every move he made was deliberate. Every gesture was designed to lower her guard. Meanwhile, Sarah's betrayal grew bolder. She stopped coming home some nights altogether. When Michael asked where she had been, she simply shrugged. "With friends," she said, her tone sharp. He didn't press her. He didn't need to. The truth was written all over her. Ryan had become a permanent shadow in their lives. Michael saw it in the way Sarah dressed, the way she glowed after her nights away, the way she compared everything he did to what Ryan would have done differently. "You'll never be him," she spat one evening when Michael forgot to take the trash out. "Ryan actually knows how to treat a woman." Michael simply nodded, his face unreadable. Inside, though, her words were fuel. Every insult, every sneer, every whispered phone call added another log to the fire burning within him. But still he waited. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. Michael was in the garage, tightening bolts on his old truck, when he heard laughter outside. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped to the doorway just in time to see Sarah walking up the driveway with Ryan. They were holding hands. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw Michael standing there. She yanked her hand from Ryan's, her face flushing. "Michael," she stammered. I didn't expect you home." Michael tilted his head slightly, his expression calm. "Clearly." Ryan straightened, meeting Michael's gaze with defiance. "We need to talk," he said firmly. Michael wiped the grease from his hands, then tossed the rag onto the workbench. "About what?" "About Sarah. About this marriage. She's not happy, Michael. She hasn't been for a long time. It's time you let her go. Sarah stood beside Ryan, silent but resolute. Michael looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. There was no guilt there anymore. No shame. Just cold determination. I see, he said finally, his voice low. Ryan placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. She's with me now. The sooner you accept that, the better it'll be for everyone. Michael's eyes flickered to the hand resting on his wife. He didn't react, didn't lash out. Instead, he simply nodded. Understood, he said softly. If that's what you both want. Ryan smirked, taking Sarah's hand again. It is. Michael stepped back into the garage, his face unreadable. Then I guess it's settled. But as he closed the door behind him, his hands clenched into fists. His calmness was an illusion, his acceptance a mask. Inside, his decision was carved into stone. That night, Michael sat on the porch long after Sarah had gone upstairs. He lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years, and watched the smoke curl into the night sky. His mind replayed every word, every insult, every betrayal. They want me gone, he whispered to himself. So be it. The next morning, Michael was up before dawn. He packed his lunch, laced his boots, and kissed Sarah on the forehead before leaving for work, just like always. She barely stirred. But instead of heading straight to the construction site, he took a detour. He drove out to a quiet stretch of road by the river, where he used to fish as a boy. The air was cool, the water calm, and for the first time in weeks, he felt at peace. Because he knew the end was coming. The days that followed were filled with a strange calm. Michael went about his routines as though nothing had changed. But inside he was preparing. Every word Sarah spoke, every laugh she shared with Ryan, every insult she threw at him, it all pushed him closer to the edge. Sarah, blind to his inner storm, continued her charade. She stayed out late, sometimes not returning until morning. She whispered promises into her phone, promises Michael could hear through the thin walls of their house. And Michael waited. The climax came one Friday night. Sarah announced she was going to spend the evening with friends again. Michael nodded, watching her leave in her new red dress, her perfume heavy in the air. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Michael sat in the dark living room, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just waited. At 2 a.m., the front door creaked open. Sarah slipped inside, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She froze when she saw Michael sitting in the chair, his hands resting calmly on his knees. You scared me, she said nervously. Michael tilted his head. Out late again. She shrugged, trying to sound casual. Lost track of time. Michael studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, his movements slow and deliberate. Sarah, he said softly, do you remember our vows? She blinked, caught off guard. What? Our vows, Michael repeated. For better or worse. In sickness and in health. Till death do us part. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms. That was a long time ago, Michael. He nodded slowly. Yes, it was. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Sarah glanced toward the stairs, as though considering retreating to their bedroom. But Michael stepped closer, his presence filling the room. You wanted me gone, he said quietly. You told him my presence disgusts you. You laughed about me, mocked me, planned a life without me. Her eyes widened. You heard that. Michael's gaze never wavered. I heard everything. For the first time, Sarah's confidence faltered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Michael leaned closer, his voice steady but chilling. You wanted me gone. And now, you'll get your wish. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Sarah's face paled. For the first time, she realized she had underestimated the man standing before her. He was no longer the quiet, loyal husband she had mocked. He was something else now, something she couldn't control. And in that moment, Sarah Thompson felt fear. The air inside the Thompson house was heavy that night, so thick that every breath felt like pulling smoke into the lungs. Michael stood in the living room, his words still hanging in the air like a death sentence. Sarah didn't move. She just stared at him, trying to understand the man who stood before her now, a man she had underestimated for far too long. Her mind scrambled for excuses, for words that could break the silence, but nothing came. Michael's eyes bore into hers, calm and unwavering, and for the first time in their marriage, she realized she no longer knew him. "Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you don't mean that." But he didn't answer. He simply turned away and walked into the kitchen. She heard the sound of water running, then the soft clink of a glass set down on the counter. When he came back, his face was unreadable. "I gave you everything," he said quietly, almost to himself. "My time, my strength, my loyalty. And you took it all and threw it away." Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. "You don't understand." "No," Michael cut in, his voice sharp enough to slice through her excuse. "I understand perfectly. You wanted him. You wanted freedom. You wanted me gone. I heard it all, Sarah. Every word you spoke to him, every promise you whispered." Her breath caught in her throat. "You were listening." "I didn't have to try," he said. "You didn't care if I heard. That's how little I mattered to you." Sarah felt the walls closing in. She backed up a step, her eyes darting toward the front door. "Michael, please. You're scaring me." He tilted his head, studying her with a strange detachment. "Good." The words struck her like a blow. This was no longer the man who once bent over backwards to make her smile, the man who sacrificed his sleep and body to provide. This was someone else, someone forged in silence, shaped by betrayal. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the space between them. Finally, Michael stepped forward. His voice dropped lower, colder. "Do you think he'll save you, Ryan? Do you think he'll love you when the newness wears off, when the weight of real life presses down? You left stability for lust, Sarah. And lust burns out." Her lips trembled. I love him." Michael gave a humorless laugh. "Love? Is that what you call sneaking out at night, lying to my face, letting him wear my clothes in my house? That's not love, Sarah. That's betrayal dressed up as something pretty." Sarah's knees weakened, but she stood her ground. "Then leave. If you hate me so much, then just leave." Michael's eyes darkened. "No. You wanted me gone. But I won't give you that satisfaction. You don't get to decide how this ends. I do." For the first time, Sarah saw what lived inside his silence all these years. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't surrender. It was something much darker, something patient, unyielding, and merciless. Her chest tightened as she realized the truth. Michael wasn't planning to walk away. He was planning something else. "Michael," she said again, her voice trembling. "Please don't do this. We can figure something out." But her words fell flat. He wasn't listening anymore. The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet Ohio neighborhood. Birds chirped outside, children's bikes leaned against fences, and life went on as though nothing had changed. But inside the Thompson house, the atmosphere was different. Michael moved with a strange calm, as though a weight had been lifted. He brewed coffee, buttered his toast, and ate at the kitchen table while the clock ticked on. His face was expressionless, but his eyes held something that hadn't been there before: finality. Sarah didn't come downstairs. Hours passed, and still she didn't appear. By noon, Michael took his truck keys from the hook by the door, slipped on his jacket, and walked outside. The neighbors waved at him as he drove past, none the wiser to the storm that had torn through his house the night before. At the hardware store, Michael bought supplies. Nothing unusual, nothing that would raise suspicion. He paid in cash, loaded his truck, and drove back home. The house was silent when he returned. That evening, Ryan called. His voice boomed through the answering machine. "Sarah, it's me. Call me back. I'm worried. Michael sat in the living room, staring at the machine as the message ended. He didn't move, didn't blink. The silence after the beep stretched long and heavy. Second call came later. Sarah, where are you? I thought you were leaving him last night. Don't do this to me, okay? Call me back. Still no answer. By the third call, Ryan's voice cracked with frustration. Michael, if you're listening to this, let her go. She doesn't love you anymore. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Michael's lips curved into the faintest smile, but it was not one of amusement. It was something colder. Days turned into weeks. No one saw Sarah again. Neighbors asked questions. Friends wondered why she stopped showing up to gatherings. Ryan grew frantic, showing up at the Thompson house more than once, pounding on the door until his fists turned red. But Michael never answered. He simply sat inside, calm and steady, as though nothing in his life had changed. To the world, he was still the quiet construction worker, the man who kept to himself. No one suspected the truth. No one saw what he had become. And he preferred it that way. On a cold Sunday evening, Michael sat alone in the living room. The house was silent, but he felt no emptiness. He had taken control. He had silenced the laughter, the whispers, the betrayal. The wedding photo on the mantel caught his eye, the one of him and Sarah on their wedding day, smiling in the Ohio sunshine, young and hopeful. He stared at it for a long time, his face unreadable. Then slowly he turned the photo face down. Ryan eventually stopped calling. The neighbors eventually stopped asking. Life moved on as it always does. But inside the Thompson house, the air remained heavy, the silence thick. Michael sat with it night after night, unbothered. Because in the end, Sarah had gotten exactly what she wanted. Michael was gone. Not in body but in spirit. The man she once knew no longer existed. What remained was something else entirely. Something forged by betrayal, bound by silence, and unmoved by guilt. And Sarah, wherever she was, would never mock him again. The story of Michael Thompson didn't spread beyond his neighborhood. There were no headlines, no whispered tales. Just silence. Because some stories don't end with screams or confessions. Some stories end with a quiet man, sitting alone in his house, staring at a photo turned face down, and the world never knowing what happened behind closed doors. And that silence was louder than anything.